Good day, ladies and gentlemen. We are here at the Prespa Dialogue Forum in Ohrid, and one of the participants is Mr. Ervan Fouere, which is well known to the Macedonian public. He was appointed in 2005 as EU Special Representative and the Head of Commission for Macedonia, former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia back then. Mr. Fouere, welcome, and thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you.
Mr. Fouere, as a man who was involved in political developments in the region and in this country and EU, North Macedonia had a problem, a big dispute with Greece, which was solved after almost 30 years with signing the Prespa Agreement. Immediately after the agreement was signed, it was expected that North Macedonia would start the accessory negotiations with the European Union, but this never happened, as we know. Do you feel that, in a way, EU failed North Macedonia?
Well, it has been a very, very difficult time for Macedonia over the past years, and certainly it was a huge challenge and, of course, a big risk for the government to embark in a negotiation with its nearest neighbour, with Greece, to try and resolve this long-standing problem. And it achieved that with remarkable courage. And of course, the motivation for that was with the prospect of joining the European Union. And for reasons not due to the bilateral dispute itself, but to the broader context of enlargement, unfortunately, the French government then imposed a blockage and said they wanted to review the methodology, etc. Okay, perhaps that was necessary, but it should not have stopped and it should not have undermined the promise that was given to the country, to North Macedonia, that once the agreement was signed with and implemented with Greece, that negotiation should start. Now we are facing another situation, and it's quite clear that the European Union is failing at the moment in its responsibilities, not just towards North Macedonia, but towards the region. And this is a very unfortunate fact, but it is the reality, and something needs to be done to address that reality.
Good that you mentioned President Macron's back then. He wanted, as you said, to introduce the new methodology. Do you think that back then, if it wasn't for that Macedonia would have started the negotiations?
Yes, I'm convinced of that, because from what I could perceive of the different discussions ongoing, and all the indications are that the European Council, European Union, would give the green light for the opening of accession negotiations with North Macedonia and with Albania, but there were some conditions attached to the Albanian issue because of a number of conditions that had not yet been met. So out of the blue came this French decision, which was even more surprising because just a few days before the referendum here in North Macedonia on the agreement, the French president issued a very strong, positive statement saying, "We are counting on you, citizens, to adopt this, to accept this negotiation, this agreement, because your future lies in the European Union." And then the next day, what did he do? He blocked it. So this was very unfortunate. And I think also it was a lack of understanding, a lack of appreciation by the French president of the significance of what's happening in the Western Balkans and the necessity to really ensure that the commitments of the European Union are fully respected. Now he has changed his approach, and he's very much in favor of the opening of accession negotiations with North Macedonia, with Albania, and all the more so, he is hoping, President Macron is hoping, that the current dispute with Bulgaria will be resolved, so that when the French presidency starts on the 1st of January next, they won't have to deal with this huge, difficult problem of the continued veto by Bulgaria. And as we know, there are presidential elections in France next year.
Correct. So now this Bulgarian dispute now seems to be even more complicated than the one with Greece. After the second veto and the request from Bulgarian side, it seems like it cannot be resolved in the near future. When you hear about the statement by our Prime Minister and Mr. Osmani, the Minister Osmani, they want to continue with the negotiations, yes, but they're also mentioning red lines, mentioning that Bulgarian side is simply asking too much,
yes,
when it comes to the national identity and the language, etc., etc. According to your opinion, I mean, how do you see this? Do you see any solution in the near future of this problem?
Well, the Bulgarian demands are totally unacceptable. It is inconceivable that the EU should be asked to accept that issues relating to history and identity become part of the accession process. If we were to follow the Bulgarian logic on this matter, then neither Ireland nor the United Kingdom would ever have joined the European Union. We have a very difficult history, maybe even more difficult than the history in the Western Balkans. And we are still discussing that history, but we're doing it in an open manner, in a non-confrontational way, and we are not imposing vetoes on each other. The Bulgarian approach is really not only undermining the whole EU enlargement process, but it is also insulting the neighbor, insulting North Macedonia, and in trying to impose its own version of history, it is playing to the populist agenda in Bulgaria. And it is really very sad and shameful to see that Bulgarian politicians are playing this game, which of course then guides the public opinion to adopt very, very hardline attitudes towards its next door neighbor, towards Macedonian citizens with whom they share so many things. So instead of having a constructive dialogue, there is this very, very harsh rhetoric. For example, there's no one from Bulgaria, from what I could understand, attending the Prespa Forum. They were invited, I'm told, but they, so they are rejecting the different opportunities for dialogue. And I think this shows that they have something to hide, or they're on the defensive. And this is not the way to resolve disputes within the European continent in this day and age.
Bulgarian President, Mr. Radev, he said that a few days ago, I believe, he gave a statement saying that this period of time they were under extreme pressure by European countries, EU members, by US, I believe he mentioned. And we were hoping also, the citizens of this country, we were hoping that EU and USA together will try to put that pressure on Bulgaria so they don't give us veto for the second time. But as we know, again, we have the second veto. Now, what I want to ask you, sir, is there were some speculations, let's say, rumors in some members of the European Parliament. There is a, let's say, informal discussion between them, saying that maybe European Union should consider changing the decision-making process,
yes,
going from consensus to a qualified majority. Do you think that this is possible?
Yes. Well, I would say two things on that. First of all, the EU's approach on the issue of bilateral disputes is, in my view, no longer tenable. Their approach is that these disputes must be resolved prior to the candidate countries joining the European Union. And certainly in the case of the dispute with Greece, North Macedonia demonstrated and took a very courageous stand and reached an agreement. but we have seen the current veto with Bulgaria and potential problems up down the road with other disputes in Bosnia-Herzegovina, with Serbia, Kosovo, Serbia, etc. And that's why I have advocated for quite some time the need for accepting international mediation. We've seen international mediation in the Northern Ireland conflict. We've seen it in many, many conflicts around the world. And there is no reason why Bulgaria should not accept a mediation by a third party, whether it is the Council of Europe, the OSCE, organizations that have a lot of experience in resolving disputes, etc. The second point it relates to the institutions and the decision-making process, and it is quite clear that this unanimity rule, whether it relates to enlargement issues or foreign policy declarations, is no longer tenable. You saw how Hungary a few weeks ago blocked a human rights declaration, a declaration of the European Union on the human rights situation in Hong Kong. And there are many other examples. And the latest decision by the Hungarian government to impose this new law discriminating against the lesbian and the LGBT community, that I think aroused for the first time very, very harsh reaction from the EU member states. This sort of debate should have happened years ago, because Hungary has been trying to test the ground to see how far it can go in imposing its very narrow, conservative, socially conservative agenda on the citizens of Hungary. And an agenda which, in many respects, is totally contrary to the values of the European Union, the values on which the EU is based. And if the European Union does not react to defend those values, does not push back against those attempts by Hungary or Poland or tomorrow maybe Slovenia, then we are really at a very, very critical stage in the European Union integration process. Certainly many of us would advocate a reform of the decision-making process, and the first reform we would advocate is to end the unanimity rule, so that certainly in the case of the enlargement agenda, the Bulgarian veto would no longer be possible. The concerns of Bulgaria could be addressed in a different way, in parallel, for example. There is no reason why these discussions cannot take place in parallel to the accession negotiations with North Macedonia. And any attempt to bring in issues of history and identity by the back door, under the so-called Chapter 35 or things like this, will signal the end of the enlargement agenda of the European Union. There's no doubt about that. So we have to fight against that at every possible juncture.
And of course, it's raising the Euroscepticism here between the citizens.
I can understand the terrible frustration of the citizens, because they have done everything that has been asked of them. And whether it is the agreement with Greece, the friendship treaty with Bulgaria, the internal reforms, but if the EU does not fulfill its commitments, does not keep its promises, then the Euroscepticism will just increase. And it's very unfortunate that, starting with Bulgaria, but also within the European Union, there's a lack of understanding of the impact this will have in the long term within the region. And it will feed the narrative of the populists, the nationalists, who are quite happy with maintaining the status quo, or those who are benefiting, all these drug trafficking, all of that, all those who are benefiting from corruption. So it really is a very difficult juncture, and it's a tragedy that neither the German nor the Portuguese efforts during their presidencies have succeeded in convincing Bulgaria to amend their approach and to allow the negotiations to continue, and at the same time to pursue the bilateral dialogue with North Macedonia as is envisaged in the treaty. Vetoes will solve nothing. As we know in our own situation in Ireland as well, before we joined the European Union. Joining the European Union provides an extraordinary framework for addressing all the outstanding problems between countries. And the whole European integration is a project in reconciliation. It has been so successful in preventing conflicts to happen since the Second World War. So the EU has experience in all of these issues.
If we go back for a second for the Prespa agreement itself, can this model of solving bilateral disputes, the Prespa agreement model, can this model be applied for the regional other disputes that we have, as you mentioned, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and especially Kosovo and Serbia? And my second question related to this is, President Vučić, a few weeks ago, I believe, he gave a statement regarding Prespa agreement saying that Macedonia, North Macedonia signed the agreement, changed its name, but gained nothing, which is partially true because after the signing Prespa agreement, we actually entered NATO.
Yes, yes.
But when we're talking about the EU, of course, have we learned something from those kind of statements? Basically, I'm asking if EU or the region is seeing Serbia as a partner in these processes, or?
Yes, yes. Well, I mean, I think it's quite clear that what was achieved in the Prespa agreement was remarkable. It was a historic achievement. At the same time, it's clear that all the existing bilateral disputes that still have to be resolved, they're all different, one from another. I mean, we see that the dispute with Bulgaria is now bringing in all this history, baggage, and all of that. So it's difficult to translate a similar model to other disputes. There are some principles that are common to many disputes, and that is that it's only through a dialogue, a negotiation, not imposing deadlines, but trying to, find common ground, and also setting up institutions that can move the process forward. And these are all very important principles, but at the same time, we have to be careful because some agreements, and certainly the Prespa agreement, did include a lot of obligations for the North Macedonians to accomplish, less for the Greek side to accomplish. This is not necessarily the case in other disputes, and so there needs to be a level playing field, first of all, and at the moment the dispute with Bulgaria is not at a level playing field because Bulgaria is using its membership of the European Union to impose its own version of history. She said, Ursula von der Leyen, that this would be a geopolitical commission. Sadly, as we see with what's happening in the Western Balkans, those words are not delivering. They are empty words because the European Union has not been capable of preventing the current standoff between Bulgaria and North Macedonia. And this is not the only problem. There have been many other problems in previous years as well, where the European Union took the Western Balkan region for granted and focused on security issues and much less on rule of law issues. It has improved a lot since then, but there needs to be much more determined effort by the European Union, a much more vocal, much more dynamic diplomatic effort by the European Union to address all the current difficulties and disputes in the Western Balkans, and to make sure that the accession process means something.
The last question, sir. Can we expect a stronger involvement of the United States of America, especially under Biden's administration? We see some signs here. A stronger involvement in the regional problems, especially when they openly say that they encourage and they support the integrations into the European Union, not just for North Macedonia, but for the entire region of the Western Balkans.
Yes. Well, before the Trump administration, there was a very strong interaction and cooperation between the EU and the United States when it came to the Western Balkans. And I remember when I was ambassador here, we had regular meetings with our American colleagues. We issued joint statements. We had a lot of work together in promoting the reforms, in trying to resolve some of the internal difficulties that arose during electoral periods, etc. So we won't talk about the Trump administration because that was an aberration with regard to foreign policy, and they did not achieve much in the Western Balkans. But now with President Biden, we see again a very pro-active administration with regard in support of the Western Balkans and in support of the European Union. But it's quite clear that if the European Union does not assume properly the leadership that is expected of it in the Western Balkans, in its nearest neighborhood, then of course the United States will probably have to perhaps, take its, well, not take its place, but try to push even more. And certainly the influence of the United States is still very strong. There's no doubt about it here. And we have some excellent American diplomats who are here at the Prespa Forum, who are the best example of the very positive approach adopted by the US administration before Trump and now under President Biden in support of the reform process in the Western Balkans, in support of security developments and the membership of the Western Balkans into the European Union. But really the onus of responsibility lies primarily with the European Union that needs to demonstrate that its commitment to the citizens of the Western Balkans means so much that those citizens will not feel the need that they have to leave their countries in order to seek their fortune elsewhere. There needs to be a much stronger commitment towards the economic future of the Western Balkan region, not just in terms of policy statements, but also in terms of decisions. And the best signal for such a decision is the immediate start of accession negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania.
Sir, one more time, it was our pleasure having you. Thank you for taking your time for this interview.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.